Okay, members, we commence questions to the First Minister. Mr Buchanan sought to withdraw after the deadline, so he's not in his place. I call Declan Kearney. Mr Minister.
Commissioner can call you, Junior Minister Early will take this question.
Agus go buithe leis an call a sachta céist. Tá ifig an naimanish freigrach as na soccer here reachtanatha, a hort an tosaí leis na fóralatha, a tasanacht einolacht agus teanga, tuisgard éireann fia dó. A chur a bhaim in a mask siúd, bonú na níthe seo lanas. An ifig an einolacht agus Larry Culterha, Commissioner Teanga na Gaeilge, agus an Commissioner an Tradition na Halbanach Olú agus na Mritanach Olú. Bei sé seo ag teach cinsi an ara agus conir muid na códaí ar an olas.
Mr Kearney.
Gormaigad a chion cóirle agus má bhuíochas leis an ara sachta fragra. An jeglad ústatu a léirú obair idir leabha leis na struchtúr as córis a chur ar bonna talugcha amach an san acht féinneolachta agus teangaí.
Minister.
Kense agus ar éis gom buithe leis an cóil. Tá obair olbhahan janta ag ifigi an rin, agus an amá sin na socrthe practicala leis na cólachtaí a bhhanú. San áibh le seo tá obair olbhahan is scala réictanis a chóirt chun cin maidir le harceacht, rialthas agus ceiriacht mar aon le cás grú a chomer. Is an céad céim eile sa phrósa seo na gála cinsi airachta leis na cólachtaí nua a bhhanú. Nar a bheits na cinsi seo janta baimmuid an tús a chur ar an phrósas capahan.
Patsy McLean.
Leis mhuichas leis an áire fásta. An jig leis an áire clarama hort dúine Kujimmer Vestrodi agus Kujimmer Vesna or Ken Ura Vesna Commissioner Capi agus fásta leis sin Ken Bushe de Ves ag ofig na Commissioneri.
Agus ar éis gom buithe leis an cóil a sachta a cheiste. De réir na taithí a marinse glachan an prósas ceapahan publi hart ar bhléin ón ura na hairí na cinsi tosaí maidir leis an prósas. Ceannas go gaithir trí commartas a rachtal i gnéan am céanna fahanne suas le 8 ceapahan publi agus déidir sé go méil níos mó ama de dhí. Agus I caint go pásanta mar Gaelgóir, be me sé Johnny Mustaach níhol agus I gobar go congrach leis na hefigi go bhfuil na hefigi seo bonithe. Tá Angelí mar asáldet tá sé bheith is breis agus blian tá pobl na Gaeilge ag fáachtar na commissionery agus le gur féidir le habar a thoiseacht agus golchan cin ar cearta cóananis agus féinneolacht le blianta fada. Mar sin de tá me sé chomantar seo agus tá an ggóil tú héan. Gwil tú hyn I géirí na commissionery agus na hefige a acal agus cwle agus a teiliolas agus mar sin truc I mé reis.
Digby.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker, you get these headphones on, I couldn't hear anything. So yeah, I think there was a question asked there and I was going to ask it again because the question was, what's the budget likely to be and that budget been factored into the budget that we've just had announced recently?
Minister.
Yes, and I thank the member for the question. In terms of the budget and the projected costs, a business case, and I will answer this in English, so you don't need to worry about that. A business case is in respect of establishing the new bodies is well advanced and it is currently in the process of being approved. But it will not be possible to meet the cost of establishing and running the bodies themselves now that the legislation has been passed and partially commenced without additional funding being provided by the two TEO. But the Executive will be making the case, as we have been, that we are massively underfunded here in the North, and that will continually be made by Executive colleagues, by the First Minister, the Deputy First Minister, to the British Government, because we all know we have suffered 13 years of Tory austerity, and we should all be laying the blame firmly at the doors of Westminster and the Tory party. But we do have work to do, and there is a lot of work that we can do, and there are many things that we can continue with, and seeing the implementation of this Act, which came into effect in 2022, is one of those.
Conor Egan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the Junior Minister for answers. Apologies, my earphones weren't working, so I'm very sorry if this question has already been asked. But again, it was on the budget, and we know we had the statement earlier. So earlier last week, could you tell me what was bid for by the Executive Office for these offices?
Minister.
I don't have that information in front of me, but I'm happy to come back to the member on that.
Stephen Dunn. First Minister.
I am pleased to confirm that we have agreed contributions towards the cost of the redress scheme from 2 of the institutions based on compensation paid to date.
A payment has been received from the Good Shepherd Sisters, and our officials are engaging with Bernardo's in respect of their payment, which we are expecting imminently. We are grateful to both institutions for their constructive engagement on this matter. We have listened to the victims and survivors, and we know that for many, financial contributions from institutions are an important matter of accountability. The independent facilitator, Mr Paul Sweeney, also engaged with victims and survivors in the development of a framework for reaching agreement. This framework has formed the basis for the ongoing negotiations. Engagement is ongoing with the other 4 institutions on appropriate contributions to the cost of redress and specialist support services. We will continue our discussions with the Good Shepherd Sisters and Bernardo's on a final payment following the closure of the redress scheme. The value of the total contributions will not be known until all applications made to the HIA Redress Board by the closing date of the 2nd of April next year, 2025, have been determined. So we encourage all victims and survivors who intend to make an application to the board to do so as soon as possible, and definitely in advance of next year's deadline.
Stephen Dunn.
I thank the First Minister for her answer. The Hart report ultimately found that abuse was widespread, and it recommended an apology and compensation amongst other things, and I do share the welcome and from the commitment financially from Bernardo's and the Good Shepherd Sisters. Does the First Minister agree that the other remaining institutions need to do the right thing, step up and make a contribution?
Minister.
Yes, absolutely, and that's why I think it's important that we now have this framework in place and that Paul Sweeney continues with the work that he has already commenced. We have these 2 contributions now secured, and it's important that we move and that each other institution steps forward now and actually pays their contribution. As I said, this is so important in terms of what's expected in terms of the victims and survivors themselves. This is part of the healing process. This is about these institutions doing the right thing and actually stepping forward. So we'll be very happy to keep the member and the House updated in terms of any progress we make on this area.
Alan Killian.
Thank the First Minister for her response so far. Can the First Minister confirm when or if there's a timeline on the negotiation? I appreciate April 25 is the deadline, but the timeline on negotiation to ensure that the other 4 not only make an interim payment, but they all make their payment in full.
Minister.
Yes, thanks for that question. So, as the member appreciates, these are obviously very sensitive and detailed negotiations which need some space and time to continue in a constructive manner. These discussions, however, are also important to many victims, as they want to see the institutions make these financial contributions, as I've said, to the redress scheme. And to date, the negotiations have involved the production and scrutiny of accurate individual data sets for each institution. There's been consideration of complex determinations where a victim or survivor may have been resident in multiple institutions. There's been consideration on the basis of the Hart report and the independent facilitators framework of each institution's ability to pay, and any payments or any other outlay that the institutions may wish to be taken into account. The member's right, these negotiations will not stop at the closure of the redress scheme itself in April of next year. It could take a further 12 to 18 months to finalise the remaining contributions for the institutions after the closure of the scheme, and this will depend on how many applications the board itself receives in the last year, how quickly they can be determined, and whether there are any legal challenges to the scheme in that period that could potentially delay matters also.
Paul Bradshaw.
And thank you, First Minister, for your answer so far. You will be aware that the institutions and the religious orders were put on notice in 2010. They've had 14 years to come forward with their contribution. Will you consider legal action if they do not come forward in a timely manner? Thank you.
Minister.
Yes, it's been far too long to get to this point. We are making progress, but clearly we have more to do. But yes, I think we have to keep all options on the table. For now, the approach has been a constructive approach, built around the framework which Paul Sweeney has developed. Everybody understands it. I've just ran through the kind of areas that are examined as part of that work. So I think it's important that we keep all options open, but I would like to think, and I would encourage all of the institutions that are found to have been guilty of systemic failings and in terms of the victims and survivors, that they actually step forward and do the right thing. That's obviously the optimum approach for the victims and survivors themselves. To this point, I think a lot of the conversations have been constructive. 2 organisations have stepped forward. The others need to do likewise, and I hope that we can progress that in the weeks and months ahead.
Back to Esmond.
The progress as reported by the First Minister, but wonder, was any consideration given to asking the institutions to pay up front into a fund from which any overpayments could have been refunded?
Minister.
I think it was, as I outlined in a previous answer, taking a look at all the data sets, the information that we had, the institutions themselves disclosing their own financial circumstance, us and in terms of our officials doing its own due diligence in terms of what we understand to be the assets of some of these organisations. But I think the correct approach at this stage has been the right one in terms of trying to get to the point where there is an agreed contribution based on all the data that we have garnered. But if we hit a wall or we have challenges in terms of some of these institutions stepping forward, then, as I said previously, I think we have to look at what other options there are open to us. But to this point, it hasn't delayed any of the contributions or compensations that we've been able to pay, but we need to recoup this money because these institutions must pay for what they did.
Thank
you for your answer so far. Minister, can you name these institutions that are dragging their feet? We've called them institutions multiple times here. Please put a name on them. And can you give us details of the monetary value that has been sought from each of these institutions?
Minister.
No, I can't put a monetary value on what's been sought from each institution. The reason being that the negotiations are in live play. The negotiations are ongoing and they're sensitive. And they're all each at different stages in terms of what we've been able to establish in terms of the data, the finances, the current state of play. So I think it's important that we give space for the negotiations, that we encourage the constructive manner in which they have been taken. But it wouldn't be appropriate to announce the amount of money at this stage that we've been able to achieve from the two that have come forward. But that will all become transparent over the space of time. But we shouldn't speculate, I think, at this stage about how much we might be able to receive in full. Suffice to say that we will publish that information as soon as the negotiations have been concluded, and people will be able to judge based on the contributions that are laid out for everybody to see in terms of the, how appropriate they feel that the institutions have responded.
Paul Bradshaw. Minister.
We have been unwavering in our commitment to implement the 5 key recommendations in the Truth Recovery Design Panel's report into mother and baby institutions, Magdalen laundries and workhouses. This includes the commitment for an integrated truth investigation and related public inquiry. The first stage of the investigation has already begun with the appointment of a non-statutory independent panel in April 2023. And key services are now in place to support victims and survivors through the testimony process. It's our intention to launch a public consultation on issues relating to the statutory public inquiry and the redress scheme as quickly as possible, following which we will finalise the draft legislation for executive agreement prior to introduction into this Assembly.
Ms Bradshaw.
Thank you for the response. I'm very conscious that time is marching on, and like victims and survivors of other historical abuse, the people who've been campaigning for the accountability, truth and justice are getting very fed up. You said there you were going to bring it forward as soon as possible. Could you give a specific timeline to that? Thank you.
I can just say to the member that both myself and the Deputy First Minister have met with our officials on this issue. Both of us have made it very clear that this is a priority in terms of us being able to turn this around and actually get the legislation through the Executive and into the floor of this Assembly for discussion and for debate and for voting through. I think it's important that we continue to work with the victims and survivors themselves to take them through this process also. But we would be hopeful that we can move at pace now that we have met our officials in the last, I think it was in the last week or so, and we hope to have a paper back on our desk in terms of proposals as to the time frame, what this looks like, and we'll of course want to engage with the committee, yourself as chair, but with the committee as well in terms of the process that we're going to take forward. So it is in the months ahead in terms of the legislative process coming forward.
Thank you to the First Minister for the answers so far. First Minister, you'll be well aware you've been meeting with Birth Mothers for Justice and others over the last number of years, and I know you met with them recently. They have requested a meeting with OFM, DFM, and would really be greatly appreciative if they could have that conversation. But can you also give us assurances that all of the victims and survivors involved in the mother and baby homes and Magdalen laundries will be given the information around timelines and consultation and what's going to happen next before anyone else?
Absolutely, I agree that women who were, as I said to the previous answer, women and who were in mother and baby institutions, Magdalen laundries, the workhouses, they've all waited far too long for truth, justice and acknowledgement. And what many of those women experienced and endured within these institutions is just beyond probably many of our contributions or our comprehensions. So it's our intention that a public consultation on the key policy issues relating to the public inquiry will launch as soon as possible. And this consultation will also be an opportunity, as you have asked, for victims and survivors to have their voices heard, particularly around the key policy issues which we're going to bring forward the legislation for. But following the consultation itself, then we're going to be in a position, as I said, to finalise the draft legislation. And I look forward to bringing it to the Executive and to the Assembly for introduction as soon as possible. And just in terms of meeting with the women themselves, I think both myself and the Deputy First Minister would absolutely be keen to do that whenever we have the policy proposals in which to take them through.
Brian Kingston.
Minister, to tell us more about what engagement has taken place with the institutions and how hopeful is she that we are reaching an end point to that?
Minister.
Yeah, so I think it's been going on for quite some time, as many members have indicated, and it's so important that we have this on an ongoing way, and it's happening actually right across a number of areas. You have your initial engagement with the institutions. We've had our officials writing to the relevant institutions and offered a briefing across the whole Truth Recovery programme ahead of the consultation itself. A number of the institutions have actually taken us up on that and have participated in some of those discussions. In addition, to the institutional engagement with PRONI, an independent panel, that's also happened. And to date, there have been no negotiations undertaken with the institutions in terms of the financial contributions, because we need to get to the point where we actually have the policy agreed, where we can talk to them about their contribution, because clearly what we've received to date is for what's gone before. But when we bring forward this new legislation, then we're going to need additional contributions from these institutions, including those that have already announced their contribution for this phase.
Colin McGrath.
Can I ask if the First Minister has considered the appointment of a dedicated advocate for the victims and survivors of mother and baby institutions, given that many of them feel left behind and let down by this process?
Minister.
Yeah, I think it's important that the victims and survivors themselves hear directly from myself and the Deputy First Minister in terms of the policy proposals that we want to take forward. There are a number of ways in which engagement has happened to this point. In keeping with the recommendations of the actual report itself, TEO officials have worked closely with victims and survivors to progress the implementation and ensure accountability. It's also really important that the voice of birth mothers, adopted adults and members are all central to this. TEO officials have also met with the victims and survivors and their family representatives at monthly consultation forum meetings on 29 occasions since the Truth Recovery programme was established, and there's about 20 people attend that each month, so there's a good level of engagement there. But no doubt there are areas perhaps where there are sensitivities and perhaps things aren't always agreed, so we should always strive for what we can do better in terms of that engagement piece, and whenever we look at the policy proposals for going forward, then we can obviously keep the issue of advocate under review.
Liz Gibbons.
Question number 5, please.
Minister.
As the Deputy First Minister emphasised in this chamber previously, ensuring that victims and survivors have a strong, independent voice remains a key priority for the Executive. The appointment of a new Commissioner for Victims and Survivors is essential to inform the development of policies and to help ensure that the longer-term needs of victims and survivors are addressed. We're currently reviewing the appointment plan for the recruitment competition to appoint a new Commissioner, and the competition will be launched as soon as possible. The appointment process is regulated by the Commissioner for Public Appointments, and we estimate that the process will take approximately 6 months to complete.
Ms Kimmins.
I thank the First Minister for her answer, and I know that safeguarding and protecting the rights of victims and delivering services is a key priority for the First Minister. In the absence of a Commissioner, can the Minister provide an update on the work of the Victims Commission?
As a body corporate, the Commission, however, continues in legal existence in the absence of a Commissioner. In the current context, the Chief Executive Officer is responsible for the day-to-day business of the Commission. The Commission continues to operate on the basis of the work programme which was agreed by the previous Commissioner, which is focused on 3 broad areas of strategic development. So that's around advocacy, history and education and young people. The Commission also continues to play a key role in a number of important areas such as design of the new draft strategy for victims and survivors, development of the regional trauma network and delivery of the victims payment scheme. There is no substitute for a Commissioner as a key advocate for victims and survivors being in post, so I am very hopeful that the current recruitment process will launch as soon as possible.
Question 6 withdrawn. I call Minister.
I acknowledge the importance of the Victims Payment Scheme to victims and survivors. It recognises the suffering of those who have a permanent disablement as a result of the conflict and provides the financial support they need to help them move forward with their lives. As of week commencing the 22nd of April, almost 7,500 applications have been submitted to the scheme, with just over 1,300 determinations made by the Victims Payment Board. To date, more than £39.6 million has been made in payments to applicants. We appreciate that there are some concerns about the length of time it can take to process an application. This is because each application is unique, it's got its own complexities, and the Victims Payments Board must consider each application on its own merit to provide the best outcome for applicants. The historical nature of much of the evidence, when record keeping may not have been to the same standard as today, also means that evidence gathering at times can be challenging. The Victims Payment Board has processes in place with a range of partners to assist in retrieving this evidence on behalf of applicants, and I would reassure everyone that officials are working closely with all organisations that support victims and survivors to keep the scheme under review and to look for ways for improving the throughput of cases. The Deputy First Minister and I have also written jointly to the Secretary of State to support the extension of the backdating deadline, which is currently the 31st of August of this year. And we've also suggested that the extension should align with the closing date of the scheme, which is currently the 31st of August 2026, because that will allow for more time for eligible applicants to be able to avail of the backdated payments.
Mr Butler.
I thank the First Minister for her answer and the assurance in around looking at the time scales. One of the other issues that is obviously popping up that the Board will be aware of is unsuccessful applications. Is there any evidence, or can you point me to those that have applied to the main reasons that applications are not being successful?
Minister.
As I said, I think there's a number of complexities just built around the system and in terms of gathering information and doing the due diligence work. But each application is going to be unique and just brings its own set of complexities to it. For example, another area where it adds just to things is that there are 1 in 3 applications, for example, include multiple relevant incidents with up to 50 listed in one application. So that kind of shows you the challenge. And I think the historic nature of much of the evidence is a challenge when record keeping wasn't the same then as it is today. I'm not aware of any particular underlying thematic thing coming through, but I will inquire about that, just given that you've asked me that question, and we can write to you if there is any sort of thing that's being identified. But I'm assuming, given the ongoing review of how we're doing things, how the payments are being made, how the process is working, it would be flagging up those areas. But if there's anything in particular, I'm happy to write to the member.
Ciara Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for our answers thus far. The Victims Payment Scheme obviously is a crucial support mechanism for those who have suffered permanent injury during conflict. My questions focus on cost. At one stage it was suggested that the scheme would cost upwards of £600 million. Can the First Minister outline what are the future funding arrangements for the scheme? Thank you.
Yeah, funding for the Victims Payment Scheme continues to be an area of significant concern for the Executive, and we're aware that the Finance Minister, Dr Keith Archibald, is engaged in a formal dispute process with Treasury in London. This issue was noted in the Executive's letter to the Prime Minister whenever we discussed this at length with the Secretary of State when we met him on the 18th of April. It's our view that the British Government must contribute to the scheme costs, because it's always been and remains the position of the Executive that the scheme, which was designed and legislated for by the British Government, goes further than what was originally intended by the Executive and set out in the Stormont House Agreement, and that not enough consideration was given to the potential impact on the Executive's budget. So that's going to be an ongoing piece of work for us.
David Holyford.
The First Minister for her answers. Can I ask the First Minister when the scheme will be extended to include those people who were bereaved?
Sorry, I didn't hear the end of your question.
To ask when it will be extended to include those people who were bereaved.
Thank you for that. This is something that we are currently looking at. I think it's important that, I'm just going to get you the right information. we're very aware that the issues affecting bereaved victims and survivors, and we're very keen that we can address their needs and acknowledge the ongoing loss felt by many. Our department has been funding the VSS to provide financial support to those bereaved victims and survivors for many years, and I'm pleased that back in April 2021 we were able to reopen the scheme for new people to come forward so that all bereaved victims can avail of this support. And since the self-directed support scheme opened in 2017, our department has provided over $13.5 million of funding to VSS to support bereaved victims and survivors. So I think that this is something that we continue to keep under review also in terms of the support that we're being able to provide.
Justin McNulty.
Thank the Minister for her answers thus far. Minister, further to the previous question in relation to victims and survivors, those who don't have physical scars but whose lives have been changed utterly and who bear the psychological scars, who've had to leave their homes, who've moved country to get away from the terror, they bear those scars to this day. Will the Troubles Permanent Disablement Scheme accommodate those people?
Minister.
I think that the complexities which I've set out, I think it's important that we do all that we can as a society that's come from conflict, that we do everything that we can to support victims and survivors and people who've been impacted by conflict. The issue that you refer to, or the category of people that you refer to, is not currently under the remit of the scheme, but I take on board what the member raises.
Brett. Minister.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, Junior Minister Riley will answer this question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Urban Villages programme has many positive outcomes. 56 capital projects comprising of shared community facilities, parks and public realm are now complete, including 13 in North Belfast, and a further 16 projects are progressing through the capital development life cycle, including 4 in North Belfast. A few examples of these projects include the Marrowbone Millennium Park, the ABC Trust Health and Leisure Hub in North Belfast, Park New Cullen and Healthy Living Centre in the Cullen area of West Belfast, Newgate Arts and Cultural Centre and Meanan Square in Derry, Prokick Community Gym and Hosford Community Homes and Inclusion Hub in East Belfast, and the Lock House and Donegal Pass Food Relations Hub in South Belfast. Since 2016, £13.5 million has been invested through revenue projects to improve good relations outcomes in all 5 urban village areas, with over £2 million invested in North Belfast. Officials have developed a range of options for the future of the Urban Villages programme. We are committed to continuing to promote thriving places and achieve the best outcomes for all our citizens, and we will update members on future plans for the programme once options have been considered.
Mr. Brett.
Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Junior Minister Riley, for that update. Can the Junior Minister confirm that, as part of those options, that the Executive Office will look at the extension of the Urban Villages Initiative scheme to cover other parts of North Belfast to ensure that all communities can continue to benefit from this very welcome investment?
Minister.
Yeah, and I thank the member for his follow-up question. In its design, Urban Villages was never intended to be a core funder. And the aim was always to provide additionality to existing provision within areas. It was always envisaged that Urban Villages would be a time-bound programme and not a perpetual long-term funder. The Urban Villages Revenue Funding Programme was extended to the 31st of March 2024 to allow appropriate time to support all project promoters, including encouraging collaborative approaches for shared benefits delivery and identifying alternative funding sources. The Urban Villages team will be operating in North Belfast until at least 2027 to allow capital projects to complete. We continue to work with our colleagues in other departments to ascertain how support can best be delivered to communities in a way which will be impactful and sustainable.
Kate Nicholl.
And I thank the Junior Minister for her answers. There have been some amazing projects in Sandy Row and elsewhere that have come to an end when the funding ceased, and I just wonder if there's any other support the Executive will be bringing forward that will allow some of these projects to continue.
I thank the member for her question. As I mentioned before, the Urban Villages Programme the Department recognises that there are varied needs across the communities here and seek to address as many of those needs as possible. Since Urban Villages launched in 2016, there has been a range of other developments impacting on what Urban Villages does next, and that will include reviews of programmes such as TBUC and DFC's Neighbourhood Renewal, as well as a cross-departmental test and learn pilot to test departmental working together, initially in the Diamond area of Derry and Auchnacloy. We look forward to updating members once we have considered how best to continue with our aim of promoting thriving places and achieving the best outcomes for all our citizens. But just to say that the Urban Villages programme idea has proved to be very successful, as you have said, and in particular the co-design process with communities, because we all know the communities are best placed to reflect their needs better than any one of us here can, or any official can. So as I said before, TO officials have developed a range of options on the future of the programme, and once that has been considered, members will be updated.
Move to topical questions. Call Matthew O'Toole.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First Minister, our party spent years arguing for an open border on this island in both goods and people. Do you agree with me that we need an open border on this island? And should we be successful in the future in achieving a united Ireland, we will need the most open border possible between the islands of Britain and Ireland?
First Minister.
Well, can I say it's really, really important that we respect all sets of relationships across our two islands, and that we work on the basis of good neighbours. And obviously in terms of the constitutional position, what I want to achieve and what the Deputy First Minister wants to achieve are two different things, but that's okay. We can work together in the executive whilst pursuing our own political aspirations for the future of this place that we all call home.
Mr. O'Toole.
Thank you. First Minister, I specifically asked you about the phrase open borders. I think this is important because our parties have fought for a long time to have the most open border on this island in goods and in people. If you agree with that, why or is your party leadership using a hard right dog whistle to talk about open borders? Isn't that, for the sake of a few votes, emboldening those who want to create a hard border on this island, including to make life more difficult for vulnerable people?
Minister.
Well, let me be very clear. I have no truck with the hard right, as the member would well know, and I absolutely support a system that is both fair, efficient, is enforceable, is compassionate in terms of migration policy, and we must do everything to make sure that anything that's done is human rights compliant. That should be the underlying factor in everything that we do. So absolutely, of course, we have a unique circumstance in our island because of partition, and that must be respected also. But we also enjoy the free movement of people across our islands, and we also, to make a more political point as opposed to from the Executive Office point of view, Ireland can't become a casualty because of the horrific Rwanda legislation that the Tories have decided to railroad through. So I'm very clear in terms of that. It's a disgraceful policy, does not serve the needs of anybody. But what we need to see now in terms of the issues that have arisen over the course of the last couple of days is that officials need to get to grips with this issue. And we certainly have tasked our officials to engage with counterparts in both Dublin and London to get more issues, to get more information in terms of the issues that have been raised, because it's important that solutions are found whenever problems are identified.
Annie Baker.
And thank you for the First Minister for answer so far. I know tomorrow we will hear a report on the recent meeting of the North-South Ministerial Council. Would the First Minister agree that the efficient functioning of all our interlinked political institutions provides us the opportunity and structures to build cooperation and joint approaches across these islands?
Minister.
Yes, and I think it builds on the previous question. I mean, the North-South Ministerial Council, which I will speak to tomorrow in terms of giving feedback to the Assembly around that engagement itself, it's an important part of the jigsaw in terms of the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement, and it's important that all elements of that are up and running and working again. So I'm glad that we have sectoral meetings happening again, because I do believe that our people are best served whenever all institutions of the Good Friday Agreement are delivering, and that's on a north-south and an east-west basis. It's important that all those sets of relationships are respected and worked upon. So for my part, I'm certainly committed to making progress, continue to work together on all those bases, because I think that whenever we collectively work through all of the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement and we're faithful to it, then I think we can continue to build a better future and give the people the support out there that they elect us to deliver for them.
Mr. Baker.
A few weeks ago, the British-Irish Parliamentary Assembly met and discussed a range of issues, including the horrors that are unfolding in Gaza, and called for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. Would the First Minister also acknowledge the importance of this forum?
Minister.
Yes, I do. I don't think we can pick and choose across the institutions. I think it's really, really important that we respect all parts of the Good Friday Agreement and all institutions of the Good Friday Agreement. So I do recognise the importance of the forum, the British-Irish Parliamentary Assembly that you've referred to, and again repeat the point that I think we're all served better whenever all these institutions are working better. And I want to acknowledge just the members' comments in relation to the gravest human rights violation of our time that we're witnessing unfold in Palestine, and we have to use all forums and all platforms open to us to call an end to the genocide, to call for that immediate ceasefire, to call for aid to be delivered, to call for the hostages to be released. I think it's important that we all collectively make that noise as much as we possibly can.
David Brooks.
Fiscal Council has warned that despite top-ups to the Northern Ireland Block Grant, that it will not reach its budgetary needs until 2035. What discussions does the Executive Office plan to have with Her Majesty's Government to speed up the delivery of a fair funding model for Northern Ireland?
I thank the member for that question, and as he knows, this has been the #1 issue for the incoming Executive. We acknowledged from day one that what was on the table in terms of funding was never going to be enough, and that we needed to get to a point where we had a sustainable budget situation, where we were in a much better fiscal environment. We've just come through a very tight budget, difficult choices for ministers to make. However, it's important that we continue this ongoing discussion with the Treasury, which we have now started in terms of the fiscal framework, and our officials and our Finance Minister are continuing to work at both at a political and official level in terms of the application of this needs-based adjustment factor in our financial package. So basically, do we get to a point where we have a proper funding model in place? Because we have work to do as an executive. We need to transform things. We need to do things better. We know all of that, but we need the right resources in which to do it. We need the money in which to invest in public services. And I am, absolutely determined, and I think the executive is determined to, with one collective voice, to continue on this conversation around with the Treasury.
Mr. Brooks.
Thank you, the First Minister, for her answer. She spoke about difficult choices, and most will understand that additional funding will come with some push for more efficient, cost-effective and better services through reform. Given the lack of pace of reform in some areas, health for example, how will the programme for government encourage significant progress?
Sir.
The executive itself is committed to transformation. We know that we can transform things, and we know we can do things better. We'll always be stronger at doing those things whenever we work in partnership and we provide the leadership that's required. And that's in health, that's in education, that's across all of our public services, because we know, for example, when it comes to the health service, we need to transform that service. We need to get to the point where we're talking about people's outcomes, how they can live longer, how they can be treated better. When it comes to education, we need to ensure that every child is valued in the education system, particularly those children with additional needs. So it's important that we continue to fight, and we let the public know that we're going to continue to fight for a proper funding model to allow us to do these things much better.
Oliver Bradshaw.
First Minister, you were earlier asked how much of a contribution was being put to each institution, and I appreciate that. However, we know that £90 million has already been paid out in terms of redress payments. That doesn't include administration and legal costs. Are you yourself satisfied that the amount being asked of the institutions is adequate in terms of the public purse?
Minister.
I'm satisfied that the framework that's been developed is the fairest way in which we can advance these conversations. So I'm satisfied that Paul Sweeney, who is heading up this work on our behalf, is challenging and pushing back and thoroughly investigating the contributions of these institutions. But we're not even at the end of the road yet. This is only, even the payments that have come forward are only partial payments. There's more to come, and we need to continue to ensure that we ensure that these institutions pay up, because it is such a large cost. It's the right thing to do, of course, but it's important that these institutions pay up. I think it's hard to judge the sufficiency or otherwise of them until we get to the final picture.
Bradshaw.
And I maybe misheard you earlier, First Minister, but did you say that there may be a point at which some of the contributions may go back to once you've reached a threshold? Because I'm conscious that the institution should not just be paying to the redress, but they should also be paying towards the professional ongoing services that many victims and survivors will need the rest of their lives.
Minister.
Yeah, no, I didn't say that. So just to be clear, I agree with you. It can't be just for the payment itself. It has to be for the services and the wraparound support, and that needs to be absolutely factored into the contributions. And there'll be no situation that I would ever envisage where, if a payment comes forward, that it would ever be pushed, given back to the institution.
Stuart Dixon.
Minister, with the Legacy Act's imposed date of the 1st of May to the end of inquests,
There's very serious and legitimate concern among organisations that support victims and survivors of the Troubles. They will see a demand in the rise for their services. Can the First Minister assure this House what additional funding will be provided for those organisations, given the additional work that this imposed legislation will give to them?
Minister.
I can assure the member that we have actually shown to date that when it came to trying to find efficiencies within the department itself, this isn't an area that we touched. We were able to protect that funding, and that obviously would remain our position, because you're absolutely right. When this legislation comes into effect on Wednesday of this week, it effectively closed down the doors for all those people out there seeking truth and justice, and I think it's the collective will of all parties of the Chamber that this legislation is horrific and it should be repealed immediately. We had a way back in 2015 with the Stormont House Agreement in which to deal with the past. I commend that approach still today, but certainly what the British Government are doing in terms of shutting down very firmly the doors on access to justice, access to the courts, is totally not acceptable. It's harrowing, and I think even the last number of weeks in terms of the inquests that have come forward, it's been a very bruising time for so many families, and it just highlights and underlines why this legislation is absolutely not good enough and unacceptable and should be binned.
Mr Dixon.
Thank you, First Minister. First Minister, given the cliff-edge nature of this particular Legacy Act, do you recognise with me that there is a serious threat to good relations and reconciliation in Northern Ireland as a result of the imposition of this legislation? And what measures is your department going to take to deal with that, to improve good relations?
Minister.
Well, obviously we're all very committed to good relations and all very committed towards building and lifting everybody in society up, and I think given our complexity of our past, I think when we look towards the future and we look towards today, prosperity should be the thing that unites us all. We need to allow everybody to prosper. Certainly that's what I and the Deputy First Minister are determined to do, to build around that prosperity agenda. But there is no doubt that as a result of Wednesday's legislation coming into effect, it's the families, it's those people that have, the victims and survivors, that are going to feel the brunt of that. It's unfair. It's actually burdening today's generation, to carry on this battle. That is completely unfair as well. And I think that we will all continue to say with one voice that this legislation should be repealed. It should be absolutely stripped back.
I call Emma Sheeran.
Minister, the news coverage that we've seen in recent days about the circumstances in which Katie Simpson sadly lost her life in 2020 raise a lot of questions about how women are treated by the criminal justice system. In light of that, would you commit to the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy?
Minister.
Thanks to the member for raising that, and I think as always in these cases, first and foremost our thoughts are always with Katie's family, who must be just heartbroken and devastated to have lost their daughter and sister. And I absolutely agree with you that this is why we have to get to grips with tackling violence against women and girls, and we are committed to prioritising bringing forward this strategy. There's been excellent work done on it to this point, but we have to break this cycle of violence, and that's not just the job of women, that's the job of wider society, and that's the outcome that I believe that everybody in this House actually wants to achieve working together.
Sharon.
First Minister, would you agree that it's going to take a whole of government approach to end violence against women and girls?
Yes, I absolutely do, and I think much more needs to be done to end the cycle of violence against women and girls, and that's at the basis and the actual heart of the strategy itself that we are developing. We need to see enhanced collaboration, we need to see partnership working across all departments, public bodies, working with Women's Aid and all of those other excellent community-based organisations that are on the ground, on the coal face, because I think that's going to be a critical first step in terms of setting the right direction for the right intervention, the right support at the right time for women who need it at the right time also.
Alan Robinson.
Further, First Minister, to the question posed by my colleague from East Belfast, do you expect further financial support in the short term from the Treasury to help in addressing Stormont's funding concerns?
Minister.
Yes, well, that's the battle for us. That's the battle from day one. We need a proper funding model. We are dealing here. Our public services have been decimated for over 13 years. because of Tory austerity. Not just here. This is the same picture in England, Scotland and Wales. The Tories have decimated public services across the piece. And that has led to the rundown of our own public services. So we have a battle on our hands, but it's a battle the public rightly expect us to fight. We cannot continue to be hamstrung to the Tories who are stripping out public services day by day. I want us to do more and do better. I think we can do more and do better, but we need the finances in which to be able to do so. So that this is going to be, I think, an ongoing theme in terms of getting to a proper funding model, but it's a theme that I think that collectively we're all committed to.
We now move to questions to the Minister for the Economy. If we can just take our ease momentarily whilst the Minister takes the lectern. Order members, we will commence the questions to the Minister and we'll call Saoirse Eastwood.
Ensure that we have a high quality career system is key to connecting our people with a full range